As technical support, I would spend most of my hours of my days on my workstation answering calls. I was never really the friendly type of person, and I preferred not to socialize at the office. I'm the boring type. I'm one of those guys whom you would casually greet, and then greet you back apathetically. We wouldn't even know each other's last name, and the feeling of disinterest is mutual. With the help of my unappealing personality, I practically secluded myself from the small community of the company I worked for. The only world I grew accustomed to was the space provided by the dividers of my cubicle, protecting and separating me from everyone else. I was at the very last section of the office, so nobody was beside nor behind me, and I liked it that way. You see, I was comfortable inside this small space and privacy. But Jules and Travis thought otherwise. They were the only friends that stayed in contact with me ever since we finished college. They always wanted me to see things on a different perspective. They eventually became a couple and lived together, while I settled on a small apartment living on my own, and I constantly tried to avoid being their third wheel since then. I didn't really know what's gotten into me that I finally decided to tag along with them one day. Perhaps it was the call that I received that one afternoon, when the person on the other end of the phone lashed out and insulted me since I failed to assist him with his problem. He told me that I probably didn't have any social life and it must be a tiresome chore to bear my dreariness. I didn't know where that came from, but well, he was on point. I didn't think it was a bad thing in a way that he made it sound, yet I was discreetly aggravated as I ended the call. It was fueled even further when my manager chuckled once I told him that I wanted a week off to travel with my friends. He easily agreed, yet his expression was rather insulting, as if he didn't believe that I had any friends. He even gave a couple of unsolicited advice. He was practically telling me that I needed to get laid. After the day was over, I reflected, and it was a good day to get out of that building, because I wanted to punch that asshole in the face. On the other hand, Jules and Travis sounded really happy that I would finally travel with them. They've been trying to pull me out of my comfort zone for years, and I always thought that kind of lifestyle I chose to have shouldn't be any of their business, but I knew they meant well. Jules and Travis were divers, which also was one of the reasons why I never felt enticed to accept their invitations, aside from traveling, which was also not my thing. Now let me tell you something. I hate water. It's the vastness of it. I'm borderline thalassophobic, and the thought of diving is just a nightmare. And I knew I just dove right into it when I finally said yes. I felt like I needed to prove a point to someone, or maybe just to me. Well, the couple got overly excited and immediately booked a flight without my consent. It would have been better if it were free, but I paid for it afterwards, and I didn't even get to decide where we would go. They told me that it would be special since it was my first time to get out of the country. A genuine tropical experience was how they put it, as if they were affiliates bluntly promoting the place. They crashed into my apartment the day before our flight and finally showed me the destination of their perilous leisure that they dragged me into. It was the Bahamas, Long Island. I thought it wasn't so bad at first. The place was quite tropical and all I needed to do was relax. Then they showed me why they wanted to go there, and the images were foreshadowing glimpses of my imminent nightmare. They were after the Dean's Blue Hole. It's the second largest, deepest blue hole on the planet. I couldn't even fake a smile when I saw it. I tried to look at it positively, but the thought of going there didn't allow me to get any sleep. Jules and Travis caused a ruckus as they behaved like a couple of kids that were about to go to Disneyland, as I laid on my bed, wide awake in fear. I hardly had any rest when the next day came. I thought the couple were finally relaxed, but they were boozing with energy still. I couldn't deny that I felt somewhat envious to see them this happy, though. It must have been a kind of thrill that I would never relate to, and they both shared the passion for it, which probably made things feel even better for them. The difference in interest clearly showed on our luggage. All I had was a small duffel bag and a backpack, while they had a number of huge travel bags with all their gear and a lot less clothes than me. They were treating me like a kid, which was also a bit annoying and kind of funny at the same time, putting me on a window seat so that I could see the view outside, showing me the paper bag that I would use when I feel like vomiting, pointing out the meaning of the signs as if all those things weren't discussed by the crew already. I was tired, but I guess I was starting to give in, because I did start feeling good about this trip. Travis and Jules' energy were finally getting to me, and so I started to see the trip a bit differently and positively. We arrived at our destination faster than I expected. The hotel we stayed in was at Clarencetown, which wasn't too far from my dreaded Dean's Blue Hole. After an hour of rest and fooling around, the couple insisted that we should head there right away. I had no say about the matter, and so we did. Initially, all I thought about was how I would be able to bear this forced vacation, and how I would be able to keep up with this couple's level of energy. But as I looked around and saw how different the place was, compared to the busy environment of the city I got used to, with the noisy streets and crammed buildings, Long Island wasn't so bad. It was, in fact, a piece of paradise. The tropical scenery and relaxing vibe of the place was so welcoming that I felt relaxed just walking around. You could easily realize the fact that you're here for a good vacation. But that was until we finally arrived at one of the deepest blue holes on Earth. Dean's Blue Hole has a 35-meter diameter with 330-foot vertical drop. Such an amazing feat for divers, but an extension of cold hell for the likes of me. The location was just right at the bay, surrounded by the trees and the land that seemed to have given way for it. The hole itself is surrounded by clear sapphire blue water, but it gets abruptly dark at the center. It's impossible to see the bottom even if you dive for 20 or 30 feet below. But I wouldn't know since I didn't do it then. There was no way that this couple would convince me to deliberately plunge into this void. I just sat at the shore and wet my feet as they prepared. Unlike me, they were both hyped by this. Travis removed his shirt and immediately swam closer to the hole. He had more experience in diving compared to Jules, who was putting on her diving gear beside me. The clear water allowed me to see him just standing at the edge as he was looking down. And without any gear, Travis just casually jumped inside the abyss. And, well, quite honestly, it shocked me. I grabbed Jules' arm and shook her hard, frantically telling her that her boyfriend just went in the hole without any diving gear. Jules just laughed at me. Apparently, Travis was an experienced freediver, and this blue hole in particular is actually famous for that kind of sport. I didn't even know that such a thing exists. Travis came back to the surface just a few minutes after his plunge. Jules told him how I reacted when he jumped into the hole, and they both started teasing me. Jules kept on pushing me to go join them, but Travis jokingly said that a frightened limp like me could easily die in there if I leap without having any previous experience at all. Now, I was a bit insulted by how he put it, but I couldn't agree more. Eventually, Travis put on his diving gear with a haughty grin on his face. He seemed really proud of it, and I would be too if I had something like it. He was bragging about how his new expensive rebreather which was actually more expensive than a decent secondhand car. It's basically a device that recycles your air that releases little to no bubbles, which makes a diver more capable for freediving. All geared up and excited, the couple plunged into the blue hole, and I just waited for them at the surface. Even though I didn't have the bravery to dive with them, I enjoyed the tranquility of this beautiful nature that surrounded me. They said this place was popular for obvious reasons, yet it was quite remote and I really liked it. After their dive, we just leisurely wandered around the island and experienced Jules' so-called genuine tropical experience. It was quite pleasant indeed. The local food complemented the general theme and the people were really nice. Jules showed me the videos she took during the dive. She was recording almost everything the entire time, and I was actually a bit uncomfortable about it. When I saw the things that she captured, I couldn't deny that I was deeply amazed. The life surrounding the hole in the vertical chamber underneath was bigger than I had imagined. Seeing it on the video actually triggered my curiosity, and it made me want to see it for myself. Even though I told nothing to them, Jules seemed to have figured it out as she was staring at me while I was watching the video. And so I did. We went back to the blue hole the next morning, and I joined their dive. The water was totally calm and a few marine creatures were swimming by as I stood right at the edge. Equipped with proper gear, I slowly descended down the hole. Jules and Travis were free diving along with me, and I was equipped with the tank. Despite my hate for the vastness of open water, the last time I had met Jules and Travis, they made me take diving lessons with them. This was many years ago, but I was still somewhat familiar with the equipment. I looked like a child under the care of two hippies, but I had fun and I conquered my fear by just a bit. As they saw me smiling when I surfaced and rested at the shore, Jules and Travis were both staring at me with questionable smirks. They told me that this spot was actually for beginners, unless I carried a weight and went down the hole in order to intentionally sink at the bottom. Me drowning in there was less likely to happen. I was pissed, but I knew they meant well. Travis pulled out his phone and showed me where we were heading next. I thought this was it, but this was nothing yet. Next thing I knew, we were heading to the island of Andros. We rented a car so it was easier to get around. It was just a few hours away from Long Island, but this one was more preserved and relatively less explored. They said it was the largest island in the Bahamas, houses roughly 200 blue holes, and most of them were unexplored. But some of these blue holes have channels connecting the underwater caverns. It was practically a labyrinth where only well-experienced divers, equipped with proper gear, would dare to go. This was the reason why they brought rebreathers. They simply tested it at the Deans. They said that the diver could easily die if the rebreather malfunctions during the dive, so they didn't trust the rentals and brought their own. The caves are made of limestone, which easily corrode with the slightest touch, and rebreathers barely releasing bubbles were perfect for the task. They confessed that the Dean's blue hole was for me, so I could get over my fear and realize why they enjoy what they do. Jules and Travis really went to this place to explore the caverns in Andros. After describing to me what they came here to do, I knew I couldn't stop them no matter what I say, and I had no reason to. But I should have. As we arrived at the area, I easily noticed that there were more natives here than tourists. The island was quite intriguing, and it did look like it was well preserved. We immediately headed to one of the most popular spots in the area. They referred to this blue hole as the Guardian, residing at Small Hope Bay Lodge, and was being looked after by a dive master. I would say that this blue hole was a lot less inviting than Dean's blue hole, but this is one of the blue holes in the island that has an underground cavern which divers often visit. Now, for obvious reasons, I was reluctant to jump in, but the dive master was quite convincing, and it sounded like I would miss a once-in-a-lifetime experience if I didn't go. Of course, pressure from my friends, lured by the dive master. Well, I couldn't believe it myself, but I decided to join the dive. It seemed they were pretty confident that they could convince me to join them, since they even brought some gear for me. They waited for me to suit up as our guide prepared us what to expect. I was terrified and excited at the same time. The water was a muddy green instead of blue, and I could easily guess what it would taste and smell like. We entered an opening as our guide led the way. Unexpectedly, the water became clear as we went further into the cave. He showed us some interesting set of stalactites that were formed before the cave sunk underwater. The space went tighter and tighter as the walls of limestone got closer. We were swimming relatively high and far from the bottom, but it was quite unsettling that we were just above a pitch-black pit, that I didn't want to think what lies below. A few moments later, we finally got back on the surface. I would say that it was actually worth it. If only that was the last dive and we headed elsewhere, it would have been a good end to this vacation. The sun was starting to set when I decided to look for a place to eat. And along the way, Travis decided to fly his drone to capture what the island looks like during the yellow sky. And I was already tired, and so I just stayed at the car. As always, the couple's energy was still as high as how they woke up that morning. Unfortunately, Travis crashed his drone somewhere, and so we went to look for it. It was already dark when we were able to locate where the drone crashed, and not far from it was a small blue hole. It looked like it wasn't well taken care of. It was in the middle of nowhere, hidden in the forest. It seemed it was one of those unexplored holes, and unadvertised for obvious reasons. The Guardian blue hole would look like a pool of a 5-star resort compared to it, and the Guardian's water was green. Jules and Travis also thought the same. The grin on their faces suggests they agreed on something without even saying a single word, which wouldn't be anything good. And so Jules and Travis put on their gear and plunged inside the blue hole without thinking twice. I kept on telling them that it was a stupid idea until they completely sunk in. There was nothing I could do from that point but to wait. 20 minutes passed, and there was still no sign of them. I was starting to get worried, and I kept looking at the spare gear, thinking I should go and follow them and see what was happening. But the air tank was already spent, and it would probably last for 10 minutes or less. And so 20 or more minutes passed, and I started to panic. I was about to put on the gear when I saw movement from the hole. The surface rippled, and then bubbles followed. I tried to stay positive. They were probably having the safety stop which was necessary after diving deep for a long period of time. And they were in there for 40 minutes already. But just a few seconds after I saw the bubbling, Jules immediately surfaced and crawled out of the hole hysterically. She was desperately gasping for air as she was crying violently. She was trying to say something to me. I knew it was dangerous to just suddenly come up from such a depth like that. And then it happened. Just before I was able to reach for her, she just suddenly lost all her energy and her face hit the ground. She was hit by decompression sickness due to surfacing too early. She started to moan in pain, yet she was still trying to say something to me. I immediately took off the diving gear off of her, so I could carry her easily to the car, but she pulled my sleeve as if she wanted me to listen to her. And then I finally understood it. There was something in the hole. I asked her where Travis was, and tears just flowed down her eyes. I wanted to know what happened to them right then and there, but I quickly realized that I had to rush her to the hospital. I sat her back up and kicked the rebreather out of the way, but just as I was about to carry her, something broke out from the surface of the water. It was tentacles the size of thick logs. One slithered on the ground as it tried to grab my leg, and the other one whipped in the air and coiled around Jules. As I fell on the ground, I pushed myself away from its reach with my arms, and then the monstrous strength of the tentacle was displayed to me gruesomely and heartlessly. Right before my eyes, the monster in the hole tightened its grip on Jules as she started to vomit blood. I tried to save her, but this merciless beast was still trying to reach for me, and all I could do was shout. She was helpless, and I was useless. I saw how Jules' life was quickly squeezed out of her as the tentacle coiled tighter and tighter. I could hear her bones break as she whimpered the last of her breath. And then a few locals arrived at the scene. They must have heard my anguished screams. They immediately pulled me away and held me back as the tentacles were drawn back into the hole along with my friend. After the incident, no one dared to dive in there and look for the bodies of them. People shared to me the stories about this unknown beast, and that other survivors claimed to have seen it. They described it as a giant octopus that often took unsuspecting victims during the night. But a few incidences were also reported to have happened during the day. Some fishermen said that the beast easily tore their boat into pieces when they provoked it for some reason, while others were sent to the hospital with giant suction marks. Outsiders consider it as nothing more but an old fictional tale, but the locals here were certain of its existence. My friends have probably heard about the stories about the legends of Lusca before we went here, but they chose not to mention it to me, so I wouldn't be afraid to go. After that, I went back home and resumed my boring life. I should have remained here. They wouldn't have died if I remained in this cubicle and answered some stupid phone calls. I didn't even dare to speak of it to anybody. After all, nobody would have believed me. It was a kind of a thing that you would have to see for yourself before you start to think that it actually exists. I was already afraid of the vastness of the waters before. But just as I was starting to overcome my fear, something like this happened, which made my phobia evidently logical.